Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on the 2022 AIDC Industry Direction Report. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I'll be going over. First, it's the policy of AIM to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. The AIM collaboration and work product policy states that committee meetings or webinars like today are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM's developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. Some additional housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is being recorded. As a registrant, you will be notified when the recording is available. You also have an opportunity to ask the analyst at the conclusion of the presentation. To take part in this, please submit questions via the Q&A option at the bottom of the application screen. Also, I've left a link in the chat that gives you access to the landing page for the report. This page goes over how to buy the report and some of the key items that the report goes into detail about. For those viewing the recording, that link will be in the video description. I'm very pleased to welcome John Burnell of Burnell Reports. This report was solely sponsored by AIM and written by John Burnell. As principal of Burnell Reports, he provides market research and content development services to help educate technology and user communities. Welcome, John. I'll let you go over today's agenda.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to everyone for joining today. I think we had registrants from all over the world, so I know people are calling in from a lot of different time zones. I appreciate you making time for us to share this. And I also have to thank Mike and Mary Lou and everyone at AIM. They've been a wonderful partner in this collaboration. Great to work with, very supportive and helpful. And together, I think we've really created some new knowledge and a new product that's both interesting and valuable to the AIDC community. So, as Mike said, I'm John Burnell. I run a company called Burnell Reports, which I've done for the last 20 years. Oh, I'm sorry, I finished the agenda. So I will talk about myself just for a minute, talk about the background for the project, how it came together, what we were trying to do with it, get into the respondent demographics. Most of what you'll hear today is based on 2 surveys that we did. So I'll talk about the surveys and who we surveyed, etc. And of course, highlights of the findings, get into what the full report covers, because we can just scratch the surface in the time and format we have available today. I've included in the deck the table of figures, so you can refer to that later to see just everything that is included in the report. And then we should have ample time for questions and answers. So next slide, please. So now I can tell you I am, again, still John Burnell of Burnell Reports, which I've been doing for the last 20 years. As Mike said, I provide content development services for tech companies, tech associations, consulting companies that are interested in various technologies that I cover. And as part of that, I do research support and some research projects as well. If people remember, if you've been in this industry a while, I was behind the RFID branding and marketing studies about a decade ago. And I've also done some collaborative reports with VDC that I'm sure everyone's familiar with their work. Through Burnell Reports, I've had more than 40 different clients in the AIDC industry. Before doing that, I was a journalist and speaker and conference organizer and did research for the Automatic ID News Frontline Solutions Scantech franchise. Very proud to say I'm a member and currently president of the AIDC 100. And outside of AIDC, I provide a lot of support to general IT and business strategy consulting research. And that gives me a very interesting seat kind of at the intersection of what's happening in general IT and operational technology, where AIDC technologies are so often applied. And that was a useful lens for doing this research. And I think it helped, it informed this research, and I think it really helps put some of the AIDC market opportunities into context. We can go to the next slide. So this is an inaugural study that, as Mike said, AIM commissioned. It was primarily done on the two surveys One was of AIDC end users, and one was AIDC industry professionals. We supplemented those surveys with some interviews with people inside and outside the industry, reviewed comments from end users, did secondary research, checked a bunch of sources. And that's been ongoing. The total project has been ongoing for about 9 months, culminating in the publication of the report just this week. Go to the next slide. We had 3 main goals for this. Wanted to answer, where does user investment in AIDC rate in kind of importance and priority to all the other things businesses are dealing with and spending on right now? We hear so much about business modernization and digital transformation, migrating to the cloud and ERP updates and a host of other things. We know that's going on. If you watch the news or pick up any kind of tech magazine or research, you're seeing the forecasts and the data for that. So we know that's going on, but that typically overlooks what's happening with AIDC technologies, which are typically used sort of closer to the front line. So we wanted to see, what does the general trends and tech developments, how does that impact AIDC? Does it help? Does it hurt? Are they related, etc.? So there were a lot of questions that tried to get at that. Second goal, we wanted to identify, outside of tech itself, the big macro trends and developments that are going on in the world. How is that influencing technology? Is it technology investment, more specifically? Is it creating a better market for AIDC? Is it making people cautious and hold on to their investments? These are things like the labor shortage and pandemic, compliance, etc. How much is that influencing what companies are doing, and how are they spending their money? And a big part of this, and I think the value of this, is by doing this inaugural study, we now have baseline data on what's important, where people are planning to spend, what's a priority, what the influences are. And that should become more valuable in future years when the study is repeated, where then we can really start to see some trends and shifts and identify additional market directions and opportunities. We can go to the next slide. I think I can summarize everything I just said with the fact that most of the questions we asked probe, what are your AIDC and enterprise technology purchasing intentions? What are the priorities? Because one of the interesting things is that what people are spending on isn't necessarily what their highest priorities are. What's driving those investments, and what are the factors, internal and external, that are preventing people from doing the types of projects, making the types of investments that they want? Go to the next slide. So the surveys. We had separate surveys for end users and the industry community. Some questions were repeated in both, so we could provide comparisons between the two. The respondent base came from AIM's own sources. Some members provided their own contacts and mailing lists, be it prospects or their additional customers. So thank you very much to the organizations and companies that did that. As I've said before, AIM's been a great partner, and membership was really supportive of this. So it was AIM's own lists, member companies, partner associations that AIM works with. The survey was open over the summer, and we got 248 responses to the end user survey and 92 for the industry survey. And in the full report, we did find some interesting differences between the two, especially on what is considered influential on technology purchases. And where we did identify differences, we feature that in the report. We can go to the next slide. A little bit on the demographics. Here we have the end users. Manufacturing and logistics each accounted for about a quarter of the total respondents. That was followed by retail at 18% and healthcare 16%. So it was good to see that the top respondents were coming from really the leading areas where AIDC has applied. At a fairly high level audience, 59% were at the director VP level or above. We didn't ask where people were based. We asked what regions they were responsible for, because we thought that would be a more informative way to measure, because especially with the higher level audience that we have, people are making decisions for worldwide operations. And we did, that did turn out to produce global coverage. As you can see, 42% of the respondents were responsible for North America, 33% Europe, 27% APAC. We have data, 70% there for Latin America. We also have data for Middle East and Africa and other places, but the percentages were small. And we asked these, on the tech side, we asked about purchasing influence and intentions for about 30 different technology categories, and we will get into some of those later. Go to the next slide. The professional respondents, as I said, we had 92. Nearly half of those were resellers, and about a quarter were AIDC hardware manufacturers. We also had ISVs in there, some consultants, some distributors. Again, we asked regionally, where do you sell? Do you sell in your country, within a region, country, multiple countries, etc.? And there was, again, excellent international representation. We also asked which use cases and vertical industries that people focus on. That's what the graphic is here. And there's a lot of the classic markets as we'd expect: inventory control, warehousing, manufacturing, etc. Next slide, please. Get into a little bit about what we were asking. As I mentioned, we asked separate questions about purchasing intentions and purchasing priorities, or investment priorities. And we asked this by, how likely are you to purchase? How likely are you to invest? And some of the response categories included: we are very likely to purchase in 2023, or we will definitely. So any respondents that said that they were very likely or definite to invest or purchase, we considered them buyers. Took a hard look at those, similar with the priorities. As I said, we had more than 20 general AID or tech categories. And then we also asked 19 specific AIDC product lines, including IoT hardware and software. I should point out that in some questions, we lumped AIDC. For example, in purchasing intention, we asked the end users, are you planning to purchase barcode technology in 2023? And that was asked along with things such as, are you planning to pursue application migration to the cloud, etc.? It's kind of looking at it as a general level. Later on, we broke it down and asked them about their barcode spending. Rather than asking at barcode system level, we asked about specific different questions about handheld scanners, fixed position scanners, label printers, software, etc. That gives us a much more granular view, but we didn't want to bog people down with that on every question. So that was the purchasing intention questions and some of the data we had. We asked where people were planning to purchase, whether it would be from AIDC resellers, AIDC manufacturers and software providers directly, whether it could be from general IT and services companies, say an Accenture that might be consulting and high-level strategy and helping with implementation, perhaps warehouse management software vendors, and asked a lot about where they were planning to purchase. Of course, the leading drivers, why were they purchasing, what's influencing it, and the obstacles, as I mentioned. We asked the AIDC community its expectations on where demand would come from, both for specific product lines, specific industries, specific use cases. We also asked a question on what percent of revenues or sales they figured would come from new projects, and how much would be coming from existing customers, replacement sales. That is a good example of data that should become more valuable over the years, as we get some trend in year-over-year change. We also asked AIDC vendors who they want to work with in 2023 and beyond that they're not working with now. That can give vendors an idea of what categories of ours want to expand into, or where there might be new competition coming from. We go to the next slide, please. So now we'll talk about some of the findings. The best thing to come out of all this was there was a really positive outlook for just about every AIDC product category that we looked for. AIDC is definitely in investment plans. There were always a lot more people that were planning to increase investment than decrease investment. Increase significantly was an option. Hardly anyone was planning significant decreases. And that made the next finding kind of all the more interesting to me. So a lot of the AIDC products, particularly barcoding, are definitely in the purchase plans, but they are not among the purchasing priorities. There was quite a gap there. For example, more respondents to this study are planning to purchase barcoding technology next year than anything else, but it ranked only 10th among their priorities. So I think this is a sign of industry maturity. I think it shows how much barcoding and other AIDC technologies are integral to what companies are doing in their day-to-day operations. They know they can't go on without it. They have to continue to invest, even as they are pursuing other strategies and other technologies, for example, cloud or major ERP upgrade project. When we got at the drivers, I think I would characterize them as saying they were very market-focused, customer-focused, improving customer service, improving product and service quality were top drivers for tech spending, not just AIDC, but overall tech spending and strategy. We asked about ERP upgrades because, as a lot of you will know, SAP is forcing upon its customers a major upgrade to the HANA series by 2027. And this is far from a small and simple upgrade and a version update. It's a major undertaking that takes months, if not years, to execute, and multiple millions of dollars to execute. So that has potential to suck a lot of budget out of other areas, and money that could be going to AIDC projects or Internet of Things projects. And we found some really interesting correlations among companies that are upgrading ERP in the next year or so, and what else they're planning to purchase. And it turns out the ERP buyer audience ERP upgrades can be a great catalyst for some certain categories of AIDC sales, not all of them. And we looked at some other special buyer personas as well. As I said, we looked at people that would be undergoing ERP upgrades in the coming year. We looked at all manufacturers. We looked at companies that were investing in IoT systems. I'm going to present a little bit more on that later, but the big takeaway from here is that there were some clearly different demand patterns among the various leading buyer personas. We can go to the next slide with some more highlights. As I said, IoT, that was kind of a divisive or a nice dividing line in some of the responses. It's very important to some respondents, and then they have their own buying patterns and intentions. Companies that are not really pursuing IoT heavily next year, they profile differently as far as what they would be buying and prioritizing. Another one of the really satisfying takeaways from the study is how well the AIDC industry is doing in showing its value in providing quality products and services. When we looked at what are the obstacles to investment, the leading ones are pretty much outside this industry's control. It was uncertainty about the economy. It's not having the budget to do everything. We asked questions about, can you find reliable products that work? Is that an obstacle? It was not. We asked, is lack of standardization holding you back from pursuing these projects? And really, it was not. Finding qualified vendors that you want to partner with. The value proposition was not considered an obstacle, not considered a problem. And so I think that's outstanding. I think that's a very positive characteristic for the industry. And I think it shows that we've all done a good job of kind of showing our value and showing our fit into overall enterprise operations. As I mentioned, we asked a separate study questions of the channel and end users. And one of the purchasing influences where there was some real I don't want to say disagreement, but where there was a gap was sustainability. The two audiences saw that as valued it much differently as a purchasing influence. Mike, if we could go to the next slide, please. Here's another example. Most of the data here is just redacted, but this is an example of some of the material that's in the study where when we were able to compare responses from end users and professionals. In this particular case, this one, it refers to their purchasing intentions. And as I mentioned, the end user audience is more likely to purchase barcode systems next year than anything else measured. So that ranked number one. When we asked the AIDC professionals what their growth expectations were and where they expected to see the most demand, barcode ranked no higher than 13th. You see three different numbers in the second column, 13, 22, 23, because we asked end users, are you about barcode systems? For the AIDC professionals, we broke that out more specifically and asked about, as I said before, handheld scanners, mobile label printers, fixed position label printers, etc. So those are just the leading individual product categories, but the takeaway is valid. You see in the second line, the two audiences were aligned. The industry has high expectations that they're expecting demand growth, where demand growth is going to occur. There is some good alignment, but as you see, there are some real gaps as well as you scroll down. And so this was a good example why it was good to kind of break out the industry from the end users and see how they both perceive things. Next slide, please. So some of the things I might not have covered yet, I wanted to give a good rundown of what's in the full report. I've talked about how we're measuring intent to purchase and priority. We have that for about 30 different technology categories. And then we have the additional breakouts for AIDC subcategories for end users. Here's some of the things that it includes on both sides. A lot is familiar. We did our TLS separate from RFID. In this slide too, you can see, and they're not all of them, but you can see some of the general enterprise tech and strategy things we're asking about: digital transformation, workplace modernization that may have peaked when everyone was rushing things to get the work from home infrastructure in place during the pandemic. How much of a priority is that? That's something else that had potential to pull money away from AIDC projects. We asked about 5G, augmented and virtual reality, because it's really starting to show up for employee training and some service applications. We asked about drones and autonomous vehicles, because that's a growth area in logistics distribution. And there are a lot more. So we can go to the next slide. Here are some of the purchasing influences and factors that we measured. I've talked about some already. The supply chain disruption. Independent from that, we asked about COVID reorganization, ESG, what's the ongoing labor shortage doing? There were some really interesting responses in that. We found a big difference between kind of rank and file workers. Feel they're very impacted by the labor shortage. It seemed less of an issue to executive level people, which is interesting. Customer trading partner mandates, they've played such a role in the history and growth of this industry. We've got the current temperature on that and several other things. Next topic, please. I mentioned we did in-depth analysis of several buyer personas of interest. So we did breakouts for all the ones you see here. We broke out the full data set and looked for any differences from the overall respondents, correlations in some cases between various variables. As I mentioned, the ERP buyers also happen to be strong buyers of some of the other categories. So the full report has breakout data for people that are planning to buy barcode in the next year, RFID and IoT, companies that are going through ERP upgrades, plus the complete set of manufacturing end user respondents that came from manufacturing company, and the complete set of end user respondents that came from logistics and distribution companies. We can go to the next slide. I don't expect anyone to read it here because it's a bit hard. I just included this. It would be better for future reference if you grab the deck after this. It shows all the graphics that are in the report, so it would give you a really good idea of what we're covering. I don't need to spend time on it here. I won't put you through reading through 48 graphic titles. Can go to the next slide. I'm just wrapping up. The report launched this week. It's available for purchase now. Mike will have that slide up later. The pricing is on a member and non-member basis, and individual and enterprise licenses. For people that do purchase the report, if you're interested in some custom data views, we may be able to do that depending on what you're looking for and how many respondents we have. And purchasing the report, also I'm available to you to spend time going over any questions or discussing it or presenting. The URL for the more information on Insight is right there. That covers my prepared remarks because I did want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers.
All right, well, thank you, John, for going through that. There still is time for you all to submit any questions you may have for John. Just use the Q&A option that should be at the bottom of your application screen. So we will get into the questions that we have right now. John, if you're ready.
I am.
So first question is, what surprised you most about the results?
I think it was the scope of the disparities between what people's purchasing priorities are and what their purchasing intentions are. As I mentioned, barcode's a case where just about everyone knows they'll be buying it next year, but it wasn't a high priority for most of the respondents, and that held for some other AIDC categories as well. And that was important because, as I said, we hear so much about data center transformation and cloud and digital transformation and workplace modernization and all that. AIDC tends to fly under the radar, but it really isn't. You can see the projects are ongoing, they are gaining momentum. And even though all these other things are going on, it's still AIDC is going to be a part of them. And I think a challenge for the industry, or an opportunity for the industry, is that the better we can relate and communicate how our technologies and their functionality enables the other higher priority things that enterprises are pursuing. I think the better job we do with that, the better sales and growth we can achieve.
Okay, thank you. And then next question we had is, did the study cover blockchain?
It did. We asked specifically about blockchain, and it produced some of the more interesting results. They were very mixed. Blockchain was a good example of when you break out the different buyer demographics. It was very high profile, high priority for some, but not for others. So that kind of skewed when you see it in the overall rank. Incidentally, there was kind of a similar, we asked about traceability systems as one of the technologies we measured, and it was kind of similar to blockchain. It was very important to some, not so much for others. And outside of AIDC, 5G was another one. You hear a lot of marketing about it, a lot of promotion. We've been hearing for some years now. It's coming. Enterprises are preparing, and it's very important to a few respondents. I'll put it that way.
Great. And kind of going along with that a little bit, what technologies or do you see new tech being included in future studies like 6G?
Yes and no. I want to. We put this survey together with a committee from AIM with input. So I think we'll always be taking the pulse and measuring future technologies. We have to be mindful not to ask too many because the questions become unwieldy. I was very pleased with the response rates we got because there were some long questions with a lot of things measured. But yeah, I think we certainly will continue to ask about new technologies. And this is where I mentioned we did secondary research. We looked at other studies and kind of saw things, and where we thought there might be significant interest or adoption plans, we included it. We did leave some things out, but yeah, it would certainly expand.
Okay, so we got a similar question a few times, so I'm just going to roll it into one question. How much do you think the COVID situation's affecting the market? Is it subsiding at all, or is it still a major issue in business priorities?
Yeah, it's an influence. That was one of the gaps. I mean, the end user audience rated COVID as more of an influence than the AIDC industry did, and so that I mean that answers a lot of the question, I believe, just like that. So it was end users rated as more important. Um, I think a lot of the projects people that are doing don't necessarily get it from the raw data, but from discussions, for this report and research I'm involved in. I think a lot of projects that are going on are still in caused by COVID, so to speak. It's part of the businesses saw they had to reorganize and they're modernizing. And it's not because their workforce can't come into the office tomorrow or can't come into the factory tomorrow, but because now they know they would be better served by being more automated. And they're learning ways to do that. So they're going forward with some of these more ambitious projects. That would be my theory. But yeah, I think COVID clearly is a driver, both directly and indirectly.
And did you see positive trends for imaging scanning, specifically in manufacturing and retail?
I'd have to look deeper into the spreadsheets, but we did not break out imaging within scanning. We didn't break out imaging, lasers, CCD, etc.
And so did the respondents list the need for additional data in the data carrier as a driver?
That was not a question we asked. It did not come up in the free responses. So I can't answer that directly or very satisfactorily. So I'll apologize to the person that asked it. We did ask very generally about standardization, and that was not an issue. So that would, I think, somewhat get at that. But yeah, that's an interesting area for follow up. And yeah, I hope that going forward we get some direct inputs and suggestions for additional data points to measure. Excuse me.
So yeah, I guess going along with that then, another question we have is there any additional questions you think would be necessary to ask for future reports on the AIDC community?
Well, yeah, I've got a whole list of things what I would do differently next time and what we can do better. I would like to get more kind of at some of the drivers and like how some of this specific demand is translating into what type of specific projects. I think that would be good research. From a practical point of view, this might make it a little bit unwieldy if we're asking about specific logistics and symbologies and processes, and then asking the same set of things for patient safety, bedside, and lab tracking. But yeah, I think we can get at some of the drivers, or perhaps there's opportunity for some follow-up studies. And one thing I meant to mention and want to make clear, it's probably clear already, is the goal of this study was not to project revenue, AIDC revenues or unit sales. We didn't attempt to count what happened or project what's going to happen. Other research does that. We were trying to bring a new angle to this and put more perspective on some of those things. So as I said, I think that was clear, but if you're interested in getting the study because you want to see what percent of sales are increased, or how many tens of thousands of handheld scanners are going to be sold in Southern Europe next year, this is not that report.
Okay, thank you. And then we had a question: how was creating this report different from others you have made in the past?
This was one of the farthest reaching, for sure, because of the dual nature. We wanted to go deep on AIDC and broad on technology, and so it was one of the more ambitious ones that way. I think that was the biggest difference.
Okay, great. So I'd like to thank you again, John, for your insights and answering some of the questions from the audience here today. If you do have additional questions, the contact us slide is up now, John's contact and the AIM contact as well. We'll definitely get back to you if there's any other questions about the report or comments you have about the report. So John, thank you again for your time.
Thank you. And thanks again to everyone for sharing your time with us.
All right, everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.